I've acquired an old Kentruck pallet
Cylinder.
pallet
Ja.
truck. It's mainly held together with some pins and a lot of these lock rings. It actually held pressure quite well once you got it up, but it was almost impossible to. You had to pump like a madman to get it to rise up. So something was not really functioning as it should. My dad had started taking it a little apart, removing the handle, and it might have been overkill, but we could see some oil seeping out through the main piston that pushes the hydraulic fluid. Decided to take it apart and see if some seals could be replaced, but I think the main problem was in the valve unit, or one of the small holes that the oil has to pass through was clogged a little bit, causing issues to get it to pump as it should. But having it this far apart, it feels nice to put it back together with new seals. I was thought I would have to try to order seals based on size, but found a company that could provide a kit that worked fine. But removed the lever for the release, and then here you can get the kind of valve core out of it. It's a very simple setup with some ball, spring, and some little pointy thing. It's not a very advanced hydraulic system. Plug was removed so we could drain some oil out of it. First real hurdle was to get the big piston out, because the cylinder itself was a bit damaged and deformed. Just hammering it would not help, so heat was added. More hammering, we did damage the top of it here, so that required some filing to get the top bearing back on, but eventually it gave up and came out. For the small cylinder part, blind bearing puller could be used to pull out the dust seal, and then the main oil seal came out very easily. There was also, I think, a lock ring and a bushing, something holding it in there. I kind of missed that. Decided to remove the wheels and grease the bearings and not have to have them flopping around. And it was plenty dirty. More lock rings. On the first side the bearings could just be pulled off. On the second side here the bearings gave a little resistance, and since I had a bearing puller suitable for it, we used that. There's a pin in the middle holding the wheel axle in place. Could be tapped out and the wheel axle could be removed. The cradle under it came off. Also held in place by a lock ring. The bearing here did not want to come up very easily, and rather than fight and risk damaging anything, I just taped it up in place so things could be cleaned up and just leave the bearing there. And then it was time to tackle. It was actually a little tricky. Eventually I figured out that the plunger that releases the pressure could be just pulled out, and then you got access to get all the little pieces out from it. A little bit of corrosion was sanded away. Inspected, there is some damage on the small piston. Spent some time trying to figure out exactly how the oil moves within it. It's not super advanced, but still a little tricky to understand what valve is to, because it's kind of two valves in there. The release and the one-way valve, but nothing too advanced. Got the new seal kit. Made this check that everything looked to be the correct sizes before starting to install anything. When confirmed, I had actually put this back together to install if I couldn't get hold of a proper kit, but now they were included in the kit, so I replaced all the O-rings here. disassembling the entire unit. Making sure it's clean where it should go. Making sure all the holes have no little debris in them. Also had a little bit of corrosion in the big cylinder bore. Tried to clean that up as best as I could. That little Scotch Brite like nylon rubbing pad wasn't taking enough, so fine sandpaper was used. Valve core was put in there. One lock ring on each side ensures it stays in the correct position. A little bit of tapping was quite a resistance when a couple of the O-rings were already in there and the last one needed to go in. Everything was well oiled, so. Then it was the big plunger. Getting the seal off that was quite a struggle. It was old and stiff. And I wonder if this one has also lost its color, because the new one was blue. Sanded down the damages on the small pistons as best I could. Got the seal, small seal in place. Also fitted the top bearing on the big piston, since it had been a little damage taking it out. We needed a little bit of tapping to get it to seat, even if it had been sanded down. Hammered the dust seal for the small piston in place. Filled a little oil in it before trying to fit the big piston. It was a little tricky getting the seal to seat properly. Eventually got the new got it in there. Also had a new bushing for it. It's just a plastic one. Turned out that it's quite a tight fit getting this up and down, and I think with the little damage that has been done to the tube, getting the lid to fit and new bushings and everything, it's kind of hard for the big pistons to go up and down, because I think the lid, the entire top part of the piston has received some damage. Well, not the piston, the cylinder, the bore, but it could be hammered in there. Needed a drift to hammer it all the way down, and then ensuring that the lock ring securing it is seated in the groove. The groove is a little bit damaged in the area. I think they have moved very heavy things with it at some point, and if you push very hard on the handle, it actually pushes on the cylinder itself and made a little dent in it. Probably they ran up against it and just pushed with all their body weight. Eventually satisfied with the lock ring being firmly seated, pushed down the little piston, made sure the valve was open because we had filled some oil in it to reduce the amount of air in the system, so piston could be forced down with some hammering. Unwrapped the lower bearing, greased that, the cradle could be fitted, snap ring could be added, ensuring that was seated in its groove also. Then the wheel axle and that lock pin, getting the bearings on there, place some fresh grease in them. This is no high spinning wheels, and it will see not a whole lot of use, so not too worried, but plenty of grease keeps corrosion out. Lock ring had added more grease before fitting the wheel, and then the inner lock ring that holds the wheel in place. And one side of one of the bearings is sealed. You must make sure that's towards the elements. With both wheels in place, we could start looking at mounting it. We had brought out the chair and fitted the cradle first with the two bolts holding that. And then we could use a pry bar and push the unit up into the top section and get the lock ring for it in place. Important to make sure you have everything that's needed on it before you start assembling, because it will have to bend it to a bad spot. The bushing, there is kind of a roller wheel on top of the small piston, so when you pump the handle that rolls, and the bushing in that was damaged a little, so needed a little bit of filing to run smoothly. It had kind of wandered out from inside the wheel, so it was hammered back in and lubed. The pin here also had some corrosion and wasn't really moving freely as it should. So some sanding and filing, and eventually we had the handle and everything together, and it feels more honest while going up. But it does stick kind of a bit, and here my dad had damaged the chain that pulls on the release lever, so I'm pushing the release lever manually, and if you step on it, it goes down nicely, so it should be good enough. My dad has fixed that broken chain, and we had also damaged a little pin that holds the handle to the pivot axle, that we could also source a new one. So it's all back together and seems to work, hopefully for many years. I hope I won't have to address this one ever again.